This video is sponsored by the Magnet Baron. More about them later on. What's up, folks? Welcome back to TacticalTortoise. My name is Trevi, and it's time for another episode of Ridiculous Rules. We're taking a rules concept in Warhammer 40k and analyzing it, Jesus, in excruciating detail. I've got a lot of questions recently about how keywords work in 40k, specifically units with multiple different keywords baked into them, and that's what I want to talk about today. So first off, what is a keyword? At the base level, a keyword is a set of descriptors that's listed on a model's datasheet or applied by war gear or special rules that allow other things to reference it, or in some very rare cases, provide some rules context. Oftentimes you'll see this in terms of stratagems or abilities, for example. An ability might affect Adeptus Astartes infantry keyworded units, so it looks for units with a combination of those keywords. Now, in rules tags, keywords are always presented in bold text, and lists of keywords can be broken down by commas. This is all described in the rules commentary, which gives an example that a list of comma-separated keywords applies to any unit that possesses any one of those keywords. The rules commentary gives the example of immortals, death marks, or lich guard units. If written in a rule this way, it would apply to any unit that has either the immortal, death mark, or lich guard keywords. If you have a list of keywords with no commas separated, it looks for a unit with all of those keywords. In this case, the rules commentary picks out Eldari Guardian units as an example. If you have both the Eldari and the Guardians keyword, in this example, the rule would apply to you. If you have Eldari but not Guardians, obviously it doesn't count. Now, keywords are broken down into 5 categories, which I will go over in a moment. This video is brought to you by the Magnet Baron. Magnet Baron is your one-stop shop for all of your miniature magnetization needs. If you are looking to get into some of the new big stompy factions that have just released, Magnet Baron wants me to talk to you about their new no-drill magnet kits. These are kits that apply alongside large miniatures like Imperial Knight and give you replacement parts as well as magnets that allow you to utilize the entire kit, adding specialized attachments and joints that allow you to add magnets into the construction of the model, allowing you to easily swap your weapons on and off. With how fast the metagame of 10th edition Warhammer 40k changes, having flexible weapon options on your models just makes sense, and especially for these expensive vehicle and Titan kits that have a wide variety of options available to them, magnets are the way to go. So check them out at themagnetbaron.com. Links are in the video description. Big thanks to Magnet Baron for sponsoring this video. Now let's get back to it. Now, the 5 categories of datasheet keywords that I'm going to use today are not necessarily rules text, but they are essentially rules subtext. These are datasheet unit keywords, faction keywords, model keywords, combined unit keywords, and unit applied keywords. And I'll discuss why these are all slightly different as we go through them. Now, the simplest one is datasheet unit keywords. As you'll see, most units in the game have a list of keywords on their datasheet. These apply to the unit and all models that are composed of that specific unit. The keywords on a unit of Space Marine Intercessors, for example, are applied to all Space Marine Intercessor models within that unit. This is similar for faction keywords. Faction keywords are just unit keywords that are usually used to define what army you're playing. These are treated exactly the same as normal unit keywords. Essentially, after the muster army step, you can kind of just pile these into your unit keywords selection, and they are treated exactly the same. All the models inside the unit have those keywords. However, mostly an army is composed of models all with the same faction keyword, with some exceptions that I actually talk about in an old video I made towards the start of the edition that discusses how allies work in Warhammer 40k. Now, from there, we get a little bit crunchier. Model keywords are keywords that are applied to specific models in the unit. These include your datasheet unit keywords. So all models in a datasheet, unless otherwise specified, are granted the datasheet unit keywords. However, in some cases, specific models may have different keywords. So, for example, if we have a unit like Marnius Calgar and his Victrix Honor Guards, you can actually see the datasheet breaks these down by model by model. Some models will have different keywords. For example, Calgar himself is a character and he's Gravis keyworded, whereas the Victrix Honor Guards are not. If you have an attached character that attaches into a unit, each portion of those retains their model keywords. So the character datasheet specifies which keywords that character unit has, which applies to all the character models in that unit, and the bodyguard unit that you're attaching into has all of the unit keywords for those models. In this case, each of those models is going to retain those model keywords separately. So the character is going to have all of the keywords on their datasheet, whereas the bodyguard unit's going to have all the keywords on their datasheet. Never the twain shall mix. The model keywords don't apply cross-combined units. Now, where the keywords do combine is in the next category, combined unit keywords. These are not found on a datasheet per se, but a unit's combined keywords are the sum of all the keywords belonging to models inside that unit. This is clarified in the commentary section that specifies that units can contain models that have different keywords. Such a unit is considered to have all of the keywords of all of its models, and so is affected by any rule that applies to units with those keywords. Remember that attacks are made against units, not models, which is important for special abilities like Anti, which we will certainly talk about in a moment. Importantly, your models still retain their model keywords, but if you have an effect that checks for a unit with specific keywords, it looks at all the models inside that unit. So if you have an attached unit that has a character with fly that is attached into an infantry unit, the unit is a character unit, a fly unit, and an infantry unit, all at the same time. However, effects that say infantry can do a special thing do not apply to any non-infantry models inside that unit. This is largely relevant for targeting. As we mentioned, a lot of abilities and strats and things like that will check unit keywords, which is the combined keywords of all of those units, whereas a lot of special rules and special effects will apply to models individually. We'll talk about a lot of these, some examples of these anyway, later on in the video. Now, lastly, we get into a little bit of rules gray area, which I know everybody loves, and I'm certainly not going to get any comments about that down below the video. This is unit applied keywords, which is not a real rule. It is not referenced anywhere in the actual rule, but I'm going to present my interpretation of how these work because it's actually not discussed anywhere in the game. There are some effects in the game, fortunately very rare, but they apply a keyword to an entire unit. However, it's never specified whether that applies to models in the unit. So the question is whether it goes into the combined unit keywords or it applies to all the models as a datasheet keyword. The most relevant example of this is the Phantasm Grenade Launcher in Drukhari, although there are a couple other ones that have kind of been contentious over the years. This War Gear upgrade applies the unit of the grenades keyword. Now, in my interpretation, this means that it basically enters your datasheet keywords and applies to all models in that unit, because otherwise it would have literally no effect, since the grenades keyword can only apply to an individual model with grenades. The grenades keyword on a unit allows you to target that unit with the grenade stratagem, but the grenade stratagem checks for models with the grenade keyword. So if the unit had it in its combined keywords, but models in the unit were not given it, then the stratagem wouldn't do anything. So, in my estimation, it works like a datasheet applied keyword and gives the keyword to everybody in the unit. That's super unclear though, and not everyone agrees with that interpretation, so I want to throw that caveat out there before we go too far. Hopefully it does get clarified and locked in at some point. Now, with that in mind, let's talk about some ways that keywords might not work how you think they do. The biggest question that I get all the time is movement keywords. There are a lot of keywords in the game like infantry, beast, fly, for example, that have a rules context that dictate how they move around the battlefield. These are usually written into sections of the core rules. For example, there's a bunch of sections about moving with fly, and the ruined terrain rules give you special rules for using infantry and beasts in conjunction with ruined terrain. Now, importantly, these keywords in specific check for models with those keywords, not units with those keywords. Now we'll hop in Tabletop Simulator here to give some examples. A good one is a recent one that's got a lot of relevance to the metagame right now, and that is the new Zangor Enlightened datasheets inside the Thousand Suns Codex. These datasheets are mounted units. They have the mounted keyword and no other movement keywords besides fly. However, they can be joined by infantry keyworded characters, such as, in this example, a Zangor shaman. I think that the justification for this is that the shamans can actually, like, dispel their Disc of Tzeentch and then summon it back. That was actually kind of showcased a little bit in Space Marine 2, which I thought was a little bit of an interesting mesh of the lore of the game and the rules context of the game. But it does open up some really weird keyword interactions in Warhammer 40,000. Now, infantry in Warhammer 40k, when they move, can do so through the vertical elements of ruined terrain features. If you have a ruined terrain feature, according to the ruin rules, an infantry model can move through it as long as it has enough space to clear to the other side. You're assumed to be able to find a gap or break your way through the wall. However, models without the infantry keyword can't do that. So these mounted units, like the Zangor Enlightened over here, will have to go around this wall in order to move. So the Zangor Shaman, being the only model inside the unit with the infantry keyword, is the only model who can walk through. Despite the fact that the combined keywords consider this unit to be an infantry unit, the model keywords are what's relevant here, and that's what allows the Zangor Shaman to pass through walls. However, the rest of the unit that doesn't possess the infantry keyword can't do so. Now, a very similar thing applies to units with fly. For example, the winged Tyrannid Prime can join into Tyrannid Warrior units. The warrior units themselves do not possess the fly keyword as a datasheet applied keyword. However, the winged Tyrannid Prime does, making the Tyrannid Prime the only fly model in the unit. In this case, that means that the unit does have fly, so some effects that check for flying enemies or flying units will apply to them. However, the only model who can use the flying movement rules, such as moving over terrain features, for example, is the Tyrannid Prime. So let's say, for example, we're in a situation like this. Our poor Tyrannid warrior unit is getting absolutely inundated by Space Marines and wishes to fall back. The flying rules state that models with fly do not have to take desperate breakout checks for flying back. However, models without fly will do so. So in order to perform a successful fallback move here, we would have to take one from the standard warrior. The Tyrannid Prime would not be added to the total of models that are falling back through enemies and taking desperate breakout checks. And while it's very rarely relevant, similarly as well, while the unit is moving, the Tyrannid Prime can use through the air movement to move diagonally over terrain features. However, the regular Tyrannid warriors cannot to do so. Now, as I mentioned before, this changes once you're discussing targeting or attacks, especially the anti-keyword. This keyword provides improved critical wound characteristics to attacks targeting a unit with that specific keyword. Because this checks for the unit that you're targeting, it checks the combined unit keywords. So, a unit containing, for example, a Tyrannid Hive Tyrant attached to a unit of Tyrant Guard. The Hive Tyrant is a character and a monster. The Tyrant Guard are infantry, meaning that the unit being targeted can be affected by both anti-monster, anti-character, and anti-infantry. Even though attacks are usually resolved against the defensive characteristics of the bodyguard, you can check out all my videos about character units in order to parse together how that works. These anti-effects will still apply even if only the character is the one applying that keyword to the combined units keywords. So all that is to say, it's very important to double check when you're considering anything that is referencing your keywords, whether or not that references unit keywords or model keywords, because which one of those it is can dramatically change how you interpret a rule. A keyword that applies to an entire unit may be much more powerful if you can attach models with those keywords into that unit, for example, or add those keywords in some other way, whereas a keyword that affects only models might have more limited use case. So with that, that is all the rules about keywords in Warhammer 40k. Let me know down in the comment section what you think about this rule, and if I missed anything that I should cover in a future video. Thanks for watching all the way to the end of the video. Thanks to Magnet Baron for sponsoring this one. Thanks to everybody who helps me keep the lights on over here at Tactical Tortoise HQ, whether that's over on Patreon at patreon.com/tacticaltortoise, YouTube channel members, and Twitch subscribers. All you people are amazing, and I love you. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and, as always, have happy wargaming.